Welcome to the South Burlington School Board meeting. And I will start off by asking for comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda. All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Any amendments, David, to the agenda?
Yeah, I have no superintendent's report tonight.
All right, so we will delete number 7 off the agenda. And Happy New Year, Cole and Arnell. We'll go on to announcements and student rep report.
So the music fundraiser of the Christmas tree pickup is January the 5th. They say please have your trees out by 10 a.m. with a $10 check made out to SBHS Music. The FHTMS play, I Remember Mama, is next week. The school performances are Wednesday and Thursday, and the public performances are Friday and Saturday at 7 p.m. Tickets are $6 for students, seniors, and staff, and $10 for adults. Tickets are available on FHTMS's website, and I also brought some little informational postcards if anyone would like for the show.
Yeah, and being that it is the new year, not much has happened since December 19th to today, but next week is the official last week of the first semester for high school students, so it'll be CAP week, which replaces exam week, so students will be in and out. Buses will run from the morning at 8:40 and at 10:40, which is pretty convenient. And then also the school has been working on a new schedule for next week that Ms. McDonald wanted me to update the board on a little bit. Essentially next semester, so starting not next week but the following week. Previously this past semester we've had FaceTime and advisory during different blocks, and it's been a little unstructured, and being as there's been a lot of changes in the environment this year, the school decided to change the schedule back to kind of what it was last year. So now, starting I think the 14th or whatever, FaceTime and advisory will be in the morning, a combined period for 45 minutes, and it'll be a lot more structured. So hopefully things will start to should be going in the right direction for the high school. So that's just something Ms. McDonald wanted me to say. And that's it.
And an announcement, Arnell, for our seniors. Our seniors have been getting notified of places that they're going next year.
Yes,
Is that
they
true?
have. Yeah.
And any announcement from you?
Yes. I applied early decision to American University, where Mr. Young's son also went, and I got accepted. So I'll be.
Awesome.
Thank you. So I'll be in DC next year.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, any other announcements? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 6, city and school collaboration.
So we have some dates coming up with both the city manager and Helen, really, the chair. Elizabeth and I will be attending those. We have a couple dates we may need to move around, but those are pretty much scheduled. In addition to that, I also have some other meetings going on with the city related to what we are calling 180 Market Street, which is the new city municipal office, library, and senior space. So those are happening. We've got those now scheduled out that they're the first Thursday of each month right now. And although our first meeting is on the 9th, which is this Thursday. So that's an off-scheduled week. And I expect to hear a little bit more specifically on the redesign components, some of the parking, some of the more articulate information on the design. So I'll be keeping you posted on that.
Can I just ask a quick question about that? I had sent you an email right before break about the latest map that you sent had a stormwater pond on the soccer field. And so I just wanted more information about that specifically, but also just sort of an understanding of how we're going to be updated as a board or how we're involved in that process, because I would hate for it to get really far down the path and then have us be surprised about what the final design looks like, and then have trouble sort of backtracking if there are things that we're not okay with. So yeah, I don't know if that was a change that was noted already or if that was just a map that was kind of slid onto
It was
that
the first,
email.
and actually Gary came with me to that meeting too, so not to put you on the spot or leave you out, but it was really, this was the first share. There were some things that we brought up, obviously, on wanting more detail. Their engineer was there who is designing, is the engineer. I don't think they're the stormwater, they're not the stormwater, they're more the traffic engineer traffic and flow. So there were some changes that we recommended or brought to their attention. The stormwater was put there. There was some fair amount of discussion on the slope of the stormwater, the stormwater pond. There's certain regulations of how many feet. I want to say like 2 feet. If you make it deeper, then you can make it smaller, but obviously that has, you know, implications. Fencing, you know, again, water can be an okay thing, but it can be a real hazard on school property. So we haven't.
Yeah, that was my concern, though, is that my understanding from our discussions over the summer is that that stormwater was being remediated on part of this property that we were exchanging with them. That it wasn't that we were exchanging this amount of property plus, then
Yeah.
we were going to be using up another half an acre of our land, doing stormwater and other things that happened because of this project. It was, my understanding was we were transferring this portion, and that was going to make the project happen. And so that's why I'm concerned now that it feels like we're already sort of starting down that path of, you know, this other things showing up on
Yeah, that's
property
taking
that we
up
thought we
space.
were using. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. We haven't really talked a lot about the stormwater location, reason, rationale. We did hear that there's a current, you know, I don't know, they don't have capacity right now in their stormwater. I don't exactly understand that and where it goes, but they don't exactly have capacity for stormwater. So that was one of the reasons for coming up with a stormwater pond. We currently have, we have some stormwater mitigation on our current property. It's hard to note, but it's right in the middle of our 2 parking lots. We put them, it's that fenced-in area. There's a stormwater pond there, or a stormwater filtration system right in the middle. So we have to move that, and the stormwater has to go somewhere too, in addition to this other space. But yeah, I get your point, and we'll again, I have this next meeting coming up on the 9th.
And have
So-
they said anything about the terrace yet? Have you seen
Nope,
any of the
I just
building
said, I
design
brought
or
up the
anything?
terrace, that's a concern, and, you know, I kind of want to wait and see what comes out of it, and I'll continue to keep you posted, you know, through this process around, you know, what those designs are, so that you can provide, and I'll be clear about, you know, knowing when the final, or what the timeline is. I suspect that, you know, they're going out these Thursdays. I mean, if we need them more frequently, then, you know, maybe that will be something that I'll need when I know more about the timeline.
Okay.
Thanks, Bridget. I think other than that,
Anything else
that's
on-
all I have on the city. Yeah, that's all I have.
All right, anything else? City School? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 8, master planning and visioning.
So we have had a series of meetings. We had a meeting again today. This was our planning meeting. And Doran Whittier has been working with us, obviously, as you know, and they've helped come up with, again, this is just kind of our draft today of some criteria and options. So identifying criteria in the categories currently right now is education, student-centered wellness, site, community.
We don't have this in front of us.
No, you do not.
Okay.
You do not. So I'm just kind of paraphrasing what we have, because there's going to be some changes to this as well. This was really our opportunity to provide some feedback to a working document that's going to help us, you know, guide them, or them to guide us in that process. So we're currently thinking that on the 16th, the board will get another update. We'll get an update on this, and a share which you can look at and review and give feedback. In addition to the board, we also feel it's important that the group that went on the tour will get some additional feedback and provide some feedback to us. So we'll be inviting them in, as well as the visioning group. We recognize that we want them to be included and invited back, so that there's some level of connection and closure to that as well, as we move forward. So those were kind of the discussion points of today. And again, we expect to get some more detail back from Dor Whittier on what those dates will be. And you'll get, again, the next update from them on the 16th. I don't know if you had anything
Well, the other
leaving
thing
out.
is, there's a pretty big meeting of the working group, which may potentially include the folks who were on the bus trip for a portion of it on the 9th, so a week from today. And instead of our usual sort of hour to an hour and a half long meeting, it's a double session to really, we sort of worked on this chart of the options and the criteria and how we're going to rank them. That means really meant to be diving in and starting to rank options potentially, yeah, really get into the details of that work. And so that'll be a half-day session. So there'll be a lot to update on the 9th, and then Rob Fitzgerald will be back on the 16th, as David said.
And I know there was some hesitation to post anything on the district website from the original visioning session. Is there anything that is able to be posted at this, or has been posted at this stage? Because I know it was contextual.
No, we do not, and that we'll circle back with them. We need to find out. We did not ask that question today around where the kind of a summary of the visioning session was, but that should be.
They had drafted one, and then we gave feedback, a decent amount of feedback on it.
We haven't got it back though, right?
I haven't seen any revision of it because the feedback was literally, 2 days before the whole holiday break. But one of the things that I was concerned about when I read it was there were a lot of great pictures of sort of the flow charts and things that people had done, the flip chart pages that had been posted on the wall. I was concerned that if we didn't dive in a little bit deeper and actually translate those into actual text, it was going to be really hard for public to kind of understand what was going on at the session. So I gave them that feedback. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but a lot of people gave them feedback on that document. So yeah, we need to follow up. It was a small team. Lee Dorr had a death in his family, so it was just Rob today, and so and the two that are in Massachusetts who normally join us by phone were also not available for family reasons. So so it was a little bit of a late session today, frankly.
Yeah, just the thought on that is to not let too much time go between that original session that I think a lot of the community was aware of, and I know we've encouraged our students to engage in as well. So,
good point.
And when something gets posted, although I totally, having participated, I understand the context issue too. So,
yep. Thanks, Elizabeth. Good point.
Good. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 9, budget planning.
So again, it seems like a long time since we last met, but with a holiday in the middle and taking your feedback from the last meeting and doing some of our work, both Amity and Gary have been hard at work making some changes to the budget. So what they're going to walk you through tonight is our latest revision. I do want to make note that we've got another meeting scheduled for next week, the 9th, and then another meeting the following week, Wednesday, the 16th. And on the 16th is the desire to warn it for action. But I think to you, the board members, obviously, giving us feedback on what we're presenting tonight and giving us some additional direction, if any, not necessarily only tonight, but giving us some direction so that we can appropriately prep. Not a lot of time to turn around, for next Wednesday if there's, changes that you want us to implement. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to hardworking Amity and Gary to walk us through the budget, and unfortunately, we got to move again. Elizabeth.
Okay, good evening, everybody. So Amity's been working pretty hard. We've been together collaborating with administrators, and we have the second iteration of our FY20 proposed budget. And it doesn't look like this is working.
It was, but
Here we go. Nope. Thanks, Amity. Okay, so the first slide is where we were when we presented on the 19th of December.
Pointer works, though.
Okay.
Pointer works for you.
Okay, so we were, if you look there, we were at 5.72% change on the expenditure budget. We were up 9.54 on the net education spending. The net education per equalized pupil was also up 9.5%, with the initial residential tax rate increase of 3.61%. Now, we had done some research with the city, and they gave us their best estimate on where they thought the CLA would land. We have got a further adjustment from the state, so we actually know that that CLA, and you'll see it on the next slide, is actually declined further, which is not great news for the tax rate. But the equalized pupil, the third iteration came out from the AOE for the equalized pupil numbers, and they were up just over 10 from where we were when we first presented this. And if we move to the next slide, which this worked. So I think this is working now, Amity.
Oh, is that why?
Yep. So the on the next slide, you'll see, based on working with administrators, Mr. Young, we have managed to reduce by 485,933, and we'll break down how that happened in the subsequent slides. That brings our adjusted expenditure budget down to 4.75% for an increase. Really, one of the big drivers, as you can see, actually our revenues, the $750,000 roughly in lost revenue, that doesn't change, unfortunately, so that's a big driver of that increase. So our residential tax rate is a 2.75% increase now in this version. Our net education spending is down to 8.26%, and our net education spending per equalized pupil is down to 7.79%. The tax rate wasn't impacted quite as much as we had hoped, based on almost $500,000 in reduction, because the CLA did drop by almost 3/4 of a percentage point from what we had initially estimated by collaborating with the city. And you can see the net equalized pupil number is 2523.68, so an increase of just over 10. So this does have a positive impact on the tax rate overall, which increases by $43 per 100,000 of assessed value in this proposal. And the income sensitivity information, it does decrease tax liability across the board for income sensitized taxpayers. So what is included in this version of our proposed budget? These are some notes. If you can see it, that top bullet, of the 4.75% total increase, just over 3% is attributable to contingency for both healthcare, premiums, and salary. That's applied to our current staff with no changes. It does include the establishment of a pre-K Triple E program at Rick Marcotte Central with 1 FTE teacher, 1 SLP, and 1 paraeducator. And I don't know, David, I don't know, I know Joanne's got I wanted to talk this.
What I think might be good is maybe just, let's keep going, Gary, and
Okay.
then Joanne Godak would like to just share with you a little bit more specifics on the Triple E programming, so when we come to an end, we'll circle
Okay.
back. Great.
So it also continues the special education model of 1 teacher per grade level at the elementary level, and adds 5 FTE teachers overall, offset by a reduction of 9 FTE paraeducators. This budget does include the addition of one school security officer at each elementary school for a total of 3. It maintains our planned facilities stewardship program, with the exception of it only addresses required maintenance items at the high school and middle school level based on our master planning and visioning study. Keeps our programming stable across the district. It adds a 0.5 FTE for high school guidance to assist with the higher need there. It adds a 0.73 in the Office of Operations and Finance to build some redundancy and frankly to build a bench there. It adds a 0.12 FTE for an assistant mentoring coordinator and a 0.29 FTE at Chamberlain for library media technician. So proposed changes from our presentation in December in collaboration with administrators. It eliminates the 1 FTE behavior coach at the high school, reduces 0.4 FTE ELL for the district. That was in addition to the current staffing level. We reduced our program contingency from the proposed $250,000 to $100,000 in program contingency. Eliminated the lease purchase of 1 out of the 3 buses that our life cycle replacement plan had recommended. It includes telephone system upgrade implementation savings. We've got some updated information and some additional options that look like we'll be able to significantly reduce that cost of implementing a new phone system. Removes the 1.0 FTE human resource position, decreases the operations and finance position from a 1.0 to a 0.73. It does include consulting fees for a need in human resources, categorizing or converting hard records to electronic records. Part of that 8,000. There was, from our actuarial work, looks like there's some pretty significant annual savings in the support staff retirement contribution. It's required by the district. And it reduces 2 FTE interventionists in the EEE pre-K at the Rick Marcotte School. So total reduction of $485,933 from the initial December 19th presentation. So for the budget highlights, it's an increase of 0.97% over the continuing service budget that we proposed or that we analyzed for the board. It increases a total of 3.64 FTEs over the current staffing level, which includes the 3 security folks and the EEE program. Overall, the expenditure budget is $2.36 million higher than FY19. Tax rate increase of a little over 4 cents, 2.75% over the FY19 tax rate. Again, a big driver is the local revenue that has decreased by $746,154. Education spending per pupil is still over $2,100 under the state threshold.
Now, is that threshold the one in which if you cross it, you get double taxed or something
Correct.
to that effect?
Well, I
Okay.
don't think it's double, but there's a significant penalty. Yes.
Right, thank you.
So again, this is the same property tax formula that we presented before, kind of just for us to pass on to the community to determine how our tax rates are calculated, where the information comes from. Again, we've got a little bit of an updated 3rd iteration of our equalized pupil estimate. We don't expect significant change from this point. And the common level of appraisal on the next slide is set. And finally, this is an updated comparison of what tax rates look like for both homestead and non-homestead tax rates from 18, 19, and 20. And again, $43 per 100,000 of assessed value. And finally, for your review, we've updated with our adjustments the proposed budget by category on the next several pages. We also, Amity has prepped the draft of the school director's budget for your review. You'll be receiving that, in the next day or so. Well, we have it tonight. And I want to be mindful of Joanne Godek being able to present you some important information on special education in Triple E. So the final piece is the staff summary, very, very similar to what was presented in December with the FTE adjustments that we highlighted earlier in this presentation. On page 15, at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the adopted FY 18-19 FTE approved count, where we are currently and where we are proposing to be in FY 20. Overall, total change from the adopted budget for FY 19 is up 1.79 FTE, and from where we are today, it's up 3.64 FTE. Enrollments haven't changed from the December 19th projection, still at a total of 2474 projected for the FY 20 school year.
Thanks, Gary. Do you mind going back to page 14?
Sure.
Sorry, you may have mentioned this.
I can't read them from here, so.
Yeah, neither can I. I should put my glasses on.
Okay.
Yeah, just the far right column. So they'll drop from 182 to 121. I think if I go up to about the middle, it's zeroed out in special ed. Is that correct?
That's
Okay,
correct.
so you did
because
say,
we-
okay.
Moving the whole staffing from the special ed at school level to the district level. So it's not
Okay.
actually changing any number there as far as by the elementary.
Okay, in aggregate, I see. It's just that it's a subset. Okay,
Yeah.
I gotcha.
rationale on that, the chart
The chart of account change, and the state asks us to report all special ed expenditures at a district level, and same with ELL. Same thing, they want those reported at a district level. So we've just followed that, knowing we have that big change coming with our chart of accounts and financial software, following their lead on the requirements.
So, if you go to page 15.
Right.
4 columns from the right, you'll
Yes.
see that jump from 10 to 70. Okay.
Correct. Well, they did jump up a little at the district level because of the proposed changes and additions for Joanne's Triple E program, as well as adding the 5 teacher. But there's the reduction in the paraeducator cohorts.
A couple clarification questions. On page 4, the assistant mentoring coordinator, is that coordinating mentors, community members to come in as mentors, or is that
Students.
Teacher mentors?
Adult mentors.
Okay, all right, thanks. And on the next page,
Page 5.
on page 5, if you could just comment a little further about whether we are at any kind of risk from eliminating the purchase of one of the buses?
No, I think we're at an acceptable level as far as life cycle replacement. Our buses are in pretty good shape. They're maintained very well. I think that we can, without any safety or major expense risk, delay one bus for one more year. There's also, I think that I've talked to you before, there's also some potential for some funding assistance next year as far as converting a bus to an electric bus under the Volkswagen settlement that we're exploring and that we're hoping to be an early entrant into.
So, two other real quick questions. Did you add into here any funding for further consulting for master planning and visioning? Has that been added yet?
No, we did not, but go ahead. Where is it?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So we've consulted, I reviewed the legal guidelines and consulted with one of the district's attorneys. And so there are funding mechanisms that if the master planning and visioning develops whatever the recommendation is, whatever election is or option is chosen. So there's some engineering, there's some design work that will have to happen to determine the proposed bond amount. So there are funding mechanisms in place that the board can take some action on to have a resolution of intent to use bond proceeds to reimburse those funds. So we've clarified with the attorney that we can use a portion, or if the board chose, all of the capital reserve to do some of that work, and that could be with a favorable bond vote replenished from the proceeds of the bond. Now, if a bond vote for the option chosen wasn't favorable, then over time we would have to replenish that capital reserve out of education spending.
Right, and we have a capital reserve of $300,000 right now.
$300,000.
So just to follow up on that, would that cover if we were going to seek some assistance for public outreach to help us coordinate sessions to inform the public of the options and what we're doing, would that be covered in that kind of funding as well?
My interpretation of the law is yes, but that specifically would have to be included in the resolution of intent from the board.
Okay, all right. And one final question. This is just a clarification. You answered this question in December, but I just want to clarify.
If I get the same one now.
No, I'm sure you'll know. The reduction in local revenues, the carryover from prior year general fund balance, there we're reducing, and it's not in the document for today, I'm looking at last meeting's document, that carryover balance is reduced by $386,000, which is a significant portion, almost half of the reduction in the local. Is that money that was essentially clawed back for the health insurance savings that we were tagged with?
A good, I'm not going to say all, but a good portion of that reduction.
Good portion of
was
that. I don't
because
know,
of
maybe we didn't
healthcare-
talk about that.
Healthcare recapture, I think, is the official term, the kinder term that was.
Well, yeah, it's there's nothing kind about it. I mean, it's essentially, just to make clear, at the end of 2 years ago, I guess it was, the session, there was some sort of bargain struck, I would say under duress, but where there were savings that were going to be implemented through health insurance that was mandated essentially, that we are expecting, or the administration is expecting, administration at the state level, not here, expecting 20% or whatever the savings number was, and all you districts are going to pay that money back to the state as savings. I might not be defining or describing it completely well, but it's not something that is attributable to the administration here or to the district. It's something that happened at the state level that has kind of put us in a little bit of a bind. We're having to make up that money this year to the tune of what, 1.5 cents probably of the
I would say.
of the 4 cents that we're paying off. And I think that should, we need to be clear.
And to
about
further that, I wouldn't, if that didn't happen, the clawback didn't happen, I wouldn't be recommending to the board that we have, or recommending to Mr. Young that we include a program contingency. That wouldn't exist in this budget had that not happened.
So, Anyway, thank you. Those are my questions.
Yeah, on page 4, you wrote, let's see, so this budget has the .73 FTE in Office of Operations and Finance. You mentioned that that was to build redundancy and add some bench, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't think that's probably the way you intended to phrase it.
Yeah,
because
probably not. I kind of picked up on that, when it came out. So there is such a, Mr. French called it initiative.
Initiative overload,
Yeah, initiative overload. That there's so much change going on right now, combining with where we've gone in healthcare administration over the last year or so as a district, that it's really a capacity issue. And as we have a new software financial system that's implemented, having that additional person in there, and it may not be permanent,
right.
But having an additional person to learn that software and to build some redundancy into the accounting function through the transition to a new financial system, we think is really important. It frees up capacity to take on all the initiatives, the time and attendance initiative, the transition to yet again another new healthcare provider, and the implementation of both a new student information system and a financial system.
Yeah, that's not really, that's a, I mean, easy and simple to say, but it's not. And again, I'm not the expert here to do that, but we have to operate. We're gonna maintain our old, but we make the transition. So we have to maintain, I mean, all that transition work has to be done. And we have to be up and ready. We have to build a budget, using the new chart of accounts. So all that, there's a lot that has to happen. And the chart of accounts, again, it's not my expertise, but is much different than what we have today. So function object codes are all going to be different. So we've got a lot of crosswalk work to do, as well as when we present in a year from now, there's going to need to be some comparability from how we shared it this year to how we're going to share it next year. So there's some level of understanding. So there's a lot of work that's ahead of us, and we know that in order to do this right, we need some additional resources.
Okay. So is this anticipated to be a one-year expense in which?
I personally wouldn't commit to that at this point, not knowing the future.
Okay.
I mean, I guess if the board could predict that we're not going to have a significant amount of additional changes, that will come out of the state or the AOE or whatever. So, I mean, we're hopeful that things will settle down. I think everyone in that particular office, in our office, is hoping that things get a little bit calmer, Alex. That said, I've said that before, I've said it in years past, and it's not necessarily happened in any one of those years.
Well, nothing gets simpler, does it? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm sure maybe there's other questions, but I'd like for Joanne to just speak a little bit more specifically about, and it's not her program, it's our program that supports our students in our community. Again, I think, it's imperative that we make sure kids start off on the best possible avenue, and certainly our program has been in existence for a while, but again, so welcome, Joanne. Thanks for sharing.
I had prepared this report for David originally when I was requesting that this be added to the budget this year. It's my second request. I think I requested it last year, maybe even the year before. So I've been asking for this for a number of years, and this year I'm pleading for this. So I put together some data just to really show that we're in dire need of this. As you can see, the first graph on there really shows the increase in child count. So this is the increase in the number of students with disabilities that we're identifying. And I think there's more need. I also think with Act 166, we just know about more kids because we have 340 some odd kids that we're serving through preschool now. So we're having eyes on children and able to identify kids who might have special needs and providing them with that early intervention, which is so important. If you look at the disabilities over time, this is the AOE data. One thing that was striking to me as I've been watching this is our developmental delay, the last column, that's the diagnosis that we have for our preschool children. It's called a developmental delay, which means they have a lack of skills. It's not a specific disability or anything, because we want to give them the early intervention. And many of those kids have speech and language delays, which is something that a lot of kids have. And if you look at the speech and language impairment numbers, those are going down. So I really feel like that indicates the intervention that we're doing is really having an increased impact. Actually, Noah and I were just talking about if we could quantify the impact of the early intervention, the intervention we do for kids, especially kids on the autism spectrum, we can see that it's happening, that kids are really developing skills, but we don't really have the quantity of the numbers to really show you that. In terms of why it's needed, we're predicting that we're going to have between 55 and 65 kids next year. Our classrooms, the 2 classrooms we have, serve 24 students, and we hold slots for 10 kids with disabilities in each of those 4 classrooms, actually. And then we also serve about 31 students in our partner preschool. So I have an early childhood special educator and a speech language pathologist that travel to different preschools to serve kids, and we just can't serve all those kids in that way. Sometimes we have to bring them in for small group or for one-to-one sessions, and we're unable, at this point, we're unable to serve the kids in the way that we can. The other thing that I talk about in this report is that parents and the kids themselves make great transitions when they're in their home school, when they start in their home school at 3 and 4. The parents are they become part of the school community, and Marquette doesn't have that right now. And I think it'd be nice for Marquette to have a preschool where those kids can start at age 3. And we would have slots for kids with typically developing kids and for kids with disabilities as well. So I don't, David and Amity and Gary asked me, could you live without this and what could you do differently? And the phone call over break, I said, we can't. We just can't. There's no other options. So there's not another option for us to do this. This is the only way we can do it, unless we made a bigger classroom. But again, class size for preschool kids, you can't have a large classroom, especially when you have a lot of students with needs. So I do believe this is something that we need to have, and I put together this report earlier on, and there's some research in there as well. So I don't know if you had any questions for me around this. I know it's an increase in FTEs, but there's an increase in need, so.
Just a real quick obvious question.
Yeah.
I didn't look through this budget proposal to see if this was included in it. Just now, it is?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's reflected
Okay.
in the budget.
But it seemed like there was a reduction in FTEs for this program since the last time we saw the budget. So it says reduces
We
2
made some
the
changes.
interventionist positions, because those are really based on student need. A preschool, a triple E classroom needs a early childhood special educator, a speech pathologist, and a paraeducator to kind of run the classroom for the 12 students that are there. So that they co-teach, and they have a paraeducator who helps like set up the snack and zip the snowsuits up and all those kind of things that have to happen. You just you just need those extra hands. And then if we have kids with intensive needs, we may have to add interventionists, but those are moving parts across the district, as you know. So some kids, as I was just telling Noah, a kid moving to the high school next year isn't going to need one of those positions. Those positions move about, and it depends on what students are here at a given point in time. So we didn't budget for those 2 that we don't know whether we're going to need them or not. So that's where we're at with that piece.
Does that answer your question, Bridget, on the FTEs? I sense
It does,
still.
so it means that we don't necessarily need them right now, but we should be aware that that can be an ask after the school year starts.
Yeah, and that kind of comes and goes throughout the school year and from year to year for me. Those are really moving parts.
What is our obligation in terms of a public school system that is K through 12 to support pre-K? And I know, you mentioned Act 66, Joanne, specifically, and that is the requirement for
To
the
fund 10 hours of preschool.
10 hours of
for
preschool.
residents, 3 and 4-year-old were residents.
But that isn't necessarily, in fact, it specifically isn't in the school system. It's with a
But
number of providers.
We're obligated to serve kids with special needs in the least restrictive environment.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't just put all of our kids with special needs in a classroom and serve them.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to be in an inclusive setting. So that's why we have the outreach and we have our inclusive classrooms. And the only other option would be to do more outreach, which I think would be even more expensive to do that because of all the traveling. And not as good for kids because we're not building that sort of capacity of Rick Marcotte to
So,
have that.
so just so I understand that, so they're, within that 10 hours of required pre-K, that includes school resources to support any identified special needs of that population.
Yeah,
Is that
those
accurate?
classrooms are taught by an early childhood special educator and a speech pathologist. So it's like it's an inclusion classroom that can provide special ed services right within the classroom.
But that's not how it's administered around the state. I mean, that's.
No,
Yeah,
no.
that,
So
because
these-
there are students that are benefiting from that 10 hours that are out with home providers and
Yes.
private licensed agent,
Correct.
things, correct, is that?
So it's different. The Triple E model is really where we're trying to meet the needs of kids with disabilities in an inclusive environment. So by building this classroom, we'll be able to meet the kids' needs that we can't meet right now. We could go to those preschools and home daycares and meet kids' needs that way, but it's really challenging to make that happen with the choice that families have.
So how many students are, just to get a frame of reference, how many students are participating in the Act 66?
166, 340.
166, sorry.
340 students currently.
And how many of those students have been identified to participate in the?
Like 50 kids.
And is that,
55 to 65 next year.
is that, that's what you mentioned that number already.
Yeah.
Is that a subset of that population that's been identified, or is that 100% of the identified student
Well,
need?
It might not, not all the kids identified with disabilities may be accessing 166. So, like my outreach teachers may bring a couple of kids in for a small group because their family has decided that their child's not going to go to preschool. But most families now, we're almost at 100% participation. Most families now are taking advantage of the 10 hours of free preschool. And so most of those kids are. By bringing this classroom, we're also bringing that revenue for those kids into the district too. So
Not
the
paying it
revenue
out.
wouldn't go out to those other preschools, it'll come to us. So that's another plus for having it in the district as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing to remember is, again, it is about early intervention, clear. But on equalized is counted, we count in our pre-K students, right? So they count at 0.46 of an FTE. So 340, if you just half that, 170 of our equalized pupils. And so revenue comes in off of that equalized. So.
And it goes out.
That's right, and it goes out, as Joanne says, I think next year it will go out, what is it, an amount, like close to 4, a little more.
3356.
Yeah, so that's what goes out, and what Joanne is saying is that for those students that we would serve in, that money would stay with us.
Classroom, yeah.
But nonetheless, I mean, part of this is about the capacity to serve them, right?
Yeah.
Is a big problem, because when you disperse the numbers, and that's what we're seeing more of, and that's part of this call, is to help bring that number more back into the school or the setting where we can best serve them.
One more quick point on the bottom line, looking at it through the financial lens, is it's difficult to qualify a direct dollar amount, but proportionally, early intervention is proportionally much less
Yeah.
the earlier it happens. And I think long-term, if we're thinking about responsibility to taxpayers over, 20 years in South Burlington, the earlier we intervene with and provide resources, the bigger proportion we save over the career of those students with needs.
I think the challenge with that, Gary, is I think intuitively, the board has heard that, and I think it's with everything else that gets added into the system, it's not really substantiated over time. So, or at least it hasn't been longitudinally substantiated over time. I think it intuitively makes sense.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring up 166 is, that is one of the many, many initiatives we've seen over the years that kind of gets placed on school systems like ours. And on one hand, there may be the advantage of identifying folks earlier and having that earlier intervention. On the other hand, it's in addition to the service that's been provided by public education in the past. So it's additive to that. Okay.
Just following on that comment, though, I guess if we've decided that the best way to give our students education is to have them start earlier, I think it's the obligation of the public schools to be involved in that instead of farming it out to others to get that done. So I mean, I think it's a wise investment. It's part of what we're supposed to be doing. But on the other hand, I mean, what has troubled me a little bit is that we've seen this preschool programming for now 4 or 5 years. And what we're hearing from our elementary schools is that the behaviors of students coming to school are even worse. I mean, it's going to be a little tougher to show with that. Maybe that's noise, but it's going to be a little tougher to show that this pre-K, the investment that we're putting in there is helping us necessarily in the elementary schools, because the trends don't seem to be showing that. I don't know if you have a comment on that, but you know what I'm saying? It's just that.
That's why we need essential early education. So if we can identify kids who have trauma challenges or social emotional challenges at age 3 rather than age 5, we can start to do early intervention, and we're doing that with kids with our early child special educators and speech pathologists. Some kids don't have the language to communicate. Some kids don't have the self-regulation skills, and the families need to be wrapped with mental health services. And we can start doing that at 3 through special education because of a developmental delay in a social emotional area. And if we don't identify those kids until 5, then they're going to come into kindergarten without any skills. Now, are they going to be, fixed by kindergarten? No, because dealing with a child who has trauma, and we've talked about this quite a bit at the board meeting, it takes years and years and years for kids those brains to be shifted into a way where they're not on high alert all the time. So having the investment in preschool in Act 166 gets kids into preschools, and they're high quality preschools based on the stars that they receive. But all those preschools are not trained and equipped to really work with kids that have that high level of need, whereas our EEE programs and staff are. So we can help to change and shift the trajectory for those kids at an earlier age. So starting at age 3, we can start to work on those skills with kids that's going to make them better ready for kindergarten, and hopefully shorten that disruption that it brings to the schools, because it is a disruption. I understand that, but it just takes a long time to really help those kids to feel safe.
I think it's fair to say that, Martin, you've definitely, and this board has heard that, the challenges that we have with student behaviors and trauma. So we hear you. I can only imagine, though, if we didn't have the program that we have, or the program that we have currently, that those numbers would be significantly more.
Right.
It's not always just, our population, that was fairly transient population, particularly in kindergarten. So a lot of those, behaviors sometimes have not necessarily, we've not been able to support through either our preschool partners because they've come from different places. But I know you'd like to have a hard fact. Since we've been doing our pre-K program, have we seen a decrease? Some of this is societal issues that are happening that we're trying to figure out at the same time. But I want to just be clear that I think what we've been providing has absolutely helped us to be as successful as we have been. And again, you're hearing we have work to do still, a lot of work to do.
Joanne,
Yes.
can I ask you a question? So what I hear you saying is that we have kids with developmental delays, speech delay, autism spectrum, whatever you want to diagnose it as specifically. but it's starting to look to me as though you may have a completely or almost separate cohort of kids who may have been, who have suffered certain traumas in their early childhood, such as abuse, or homelessness, or parents, just being absent as parents. So perhaps they have drug addiction or something like that. And it sounds to me as though through this conversation, we might be getting the two cohorts a little confused or mixed together, and I'm wondering if you can help say a few things to clarify my understanding of this.
So a developmental delay, so for kids to be eligible for early intervention, they need to have a developmental delay, either cognitively, so in their learning, either in their language and communication, their motor abilities, or their social emotional abilities. Yeah. And I can't tell you, it's a certain % delay based on the normative scores. So kids can have a delay in social emotional area based on, they could have mental health issues already, or they could come from a deprived environment that causes that, and they could have communication issues. So they can receive a developmental delay based on many of those different factors, because what early intervention is really to identify any delay in those areas that I described and try to mitigate that so that they can be better prepared to be successful in kindergarten and in first grade. That makes sense. So it's not always a medical diagnosis of like autism or mental health. It could be just a delay that our special educators can do an assessment and show that there's a gap between where they should be and where they're actually performing.
So how does that fit in with what Martin's concern was, is that we're seeing more, I don't know if you want to call it disruptive behavior or what, or the need to address it more based on, students who have a history of being traumatized, whether in their homes,
So we would be using strategies to work with those students so that they can feel safe in school. Yeah. We would be working with strategies on how they can feel they belong, they feel safe, and that they can start to learn to self-regulate their behavior. We have to accept them where they're at and start working with them on those skills. We can't punish them or suspend them or do the same kind of strategies we used to do for kids who are misbehaving in school, because it doesn't work, because they're misbehaving because that's what keeps them alive. So we're trying to re-educate our staff on how to work with kids that way, and then kids can gradually start to feel comfortable and safe and can learn and less disruptive in the school. So it's a combination of working on the mental health issues that the child has, creating an environment where they're safe, and strategies to help them build their skills. And we can start that at age 3 if they're identified with a developmental delay.
Right.
Joanne, a quick question.
Yes.
And this may be a dumb question, but does this create an equity issue with the over 300, preschoolers that are participating in a variety of South Burlington?
By creating this classroom?
By not creating that opportunity for every student, because you've said there are some people who are more trained than others, and
well, when we identify kids with a disability or a developmental delay, we're obligated under law to provide them with the specialized services they need to start to develop those skills. So we have to do it wherever, in whatever way we can, which is what I'm trying to do right now. So we have the options of the 2 classrooms where kids can come in and work with a special educator and a speech pathologist, and then I have a special educator and speech pathologist that will go to those other preschools and consult with those teachers and try and do some specialized services in that way. So is there an equity issue? I don't know if it's an equity issue, it's an access issue to special services. So I think in general, Act 166 is really looking at an equity issue about are people with people from poverty actually accessing high-quality childcare. They're trying to collect some information on that, because I think the people in the know, the people who have an education and are knowledgeable, are getting their kids their 10 hours, and people who are not in the know are not really getting, or don't really know what programs to go to. So I think by us creating a program, we may provide access to some families who are not in the know. Where our classrooms tend to, the ones that we have in this public school that we have right now, tend to draw some of our EL families, so families who don't understand the system. Act 166, and you know this because I've talked with you about it, it's a complicated system. It's hard to figure out and how to get your child enrolled and all those things. So having a public program, I think, makes it a little bit easier for people to access. So it may help with some of the equity.
Are central students not allowed, like, not able to access the other two schools ones? Because, like, I know
they're there.
Oh, they
yeah,
are.
they're there as well. So we try and place Chamberlain students at the Chamberlain preschool, Orchard at Orchard, and then disperse the central students between those two programs so that they're equally distributed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good question, though.
Thank you, Joanne. So I don't know, Board, if there's other questions related to the budget. I do want to, before we go on, I do want to also recognize that, you know, both Gary and Amity have been working with the Budget Advisory Group. I've been to one meeting, and I do know that Diane Bugby's in the room, and she's been part of the advisory too. And it's been helpful, I think, to both Gary and Amity and myself, just listening to some of the feedback around the construct of this particular budget. And I expect you'll probably hear more as time goes on as well, leading up to the 19th. 19th, is that right, 16th? 16th, sorry.
And the 9th.
Yeah, right.
So I had two quick follow-on questions, if we could. One is, I would just like to get clarity on the FTE number and sort of what is incremental to the FY19 budget. And I think I understand it, but just want to clarify that. And then, Gary or Amity, if we could just do another rundown of the revenue, I don't know if you want to call it a loss, or the revenue change, just kind of the 80-20 rule of what is contributing the most to that revenue change in the summary.
You're looking more at where we're at today versus the adopted 19, or would you, I'm sorry.
Over the FY19 budget.
Where we're standing today
Yeah.
with the proposed?
Yes, because there's some net,
15.
you know, I mean, by way of
15,
example, there was
14, 15.
on
Steve.
page, on page 4, bullet point 3 indicate, bullet point 3 would indicate that there are 5 FTE teachers added, but 9 FTE paraeducators. And, you know, that's a net reduction of 4, but it's at a substantially lower compensation rate, for instance. So I'm kind of looking for a reconciliation on the FTE proposed budget.
Dollar value of those changes over the increase in the FTE is what
Yeah.
you're looking for more specifically? Is that?
Pre-reimbursement, that was 160,000.
Okay.
So,
But some of that will be offset, right?
Right, with 56% on the 5 special educators and the 9
Mhm.
reduction in paraeducators, there would still be more revenue received from the state special ed formula because the expense would be a little higher, so that would bring in a little bit more on the state's formula of the 56%.
But if I look at page 4, does that summary net out to the district 3.64
It does.
on page 15?
It does. I can tell you all of them again. Over our current 2019 number, we have the 3 security,
Mhm.
the .73 Office of Operations and Finance. There's the .5 high school.
Mhm.
There's a .12 mentor assistant, a .29 library media, then the reduction of 9 paras with the addition of 5 teachers, and then the Triple E program with additional 3. So all those together net to 3.64.
And is there, you may not have this available right away, but it would be helpful to understand, to kind of dollarize that 3.64.
Okay.
And then the other point was on the summary sheet, sorry, I gotta go back and find it. The 746 of less other revenue, which I don't think changed over the December presentation, correct?
That did not.
Yeah, just kind of what the 80-20 rule there is. I think we covered the healthcare
Yeah,
recapture
definitely
was.
the recapturing
Yeah.
was probably 80% of that.
We shared with you earlier that we had some recalculation, places where we had
Yeah.
revenue placed in expenses and revenue. So
Yep.
those were some corrections that were made from the previous year.
So the total of that, the healthcare recapture is, you said, Amity, 70 or 80% of it?
Yeah, because that total was 4.3% reduction. Oh, no, I'm sorry, wrong line. That was a loss of 384,000 specifically.
And then the revenue restatements in aggregate were about, was that about 300 or so?
Well,
We counted it both in revenue and in
right,
expenses.
so that was 190,000 that was incorrectly counted.
So that's already 600 of the
Yeah.
746. Okay, so that's kind of the 80-20 right there.
There's your 80/20.
Okay. All right, thanks. Any other questions on the budget? Any questions from the public? Diane?
I just had a question for Joanne on the triple E classroom and the peer model, and how are those peers, like how do they get into the program? Is there a lottery and?
No, it's active, well, they get to put their applications in for Act 166. We do a open house coming up in February, and we post that, so we're gonna just make a guess that we're gonna have another classroom. And then we do have we might get a waiting list if we can't, we don't have them. They stay on the waiting list, so we try. We also have partner programs in the area that save us slots, so we try to work with some partner programs and focus our support in those programs as well. So they don't get into our classrooms, then we try and help them get into those other programs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth, to follow up, it was 190,000 in revenue, plus 100,000 on the expense side. For the, it was just a placeholder number. Was it kind of transposed?
Piece that we need to talk to you about earlier.
Thank you.
So,
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sorry.
Hello. I'm interested in knowing, because it's only this year to next year, sort of our student population, has it been stable, has it been growing, has it been decreasing? Because one thing we're seeing now, the birth rate in Vermont is lower than it's been since the Civil War. So what's happening in South Burlington, we're growing here in our community, but around the state, there's not any new babies being born 5 years from now. And will that impact us in South Burlington? How do you plan for this?
it's a great question. So in part, on pages 16, 17, and 18 talks a little bit more specifically about our enrollments projections. It doesn't give you a lot of past data, so to answer your question more specifically, our enrollments have been steady here, and they're projected to be fairly steady up until about 2026, and then maybe a slight leveling off, but nothing really significant. We are on Friday, actually, this Friday, meeting with the demographer who does all of those projections, and we're meeting with him specifically to talk also about developments that are in the queue, or either planned or in the process of being built, and what they might have for an impact on us. In the past, we've had this done a couple of years, 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago, and we're going to re-update the information. But what we're at least seeing from the past information is that enrollment projection that I just shared. So pretty flat. That is different. You're correct. A lot of our partner schools throughout Vermont are seeing, decreases in their student population.
Yeah, I think another notable point that we often talk about, and I'm sure we'll talk about as we go into the next couple budget sessions, are that we do attract a significant portion of tuition students from outside the district, and that allows us to continue our pretty robust programming, but that has grown over the years, and it gives us some stability in terms of enrollment, but it also, it makes up, I think we're at about 12 to 15% of our high school population is from outside South Burlington. And the nice thing is it leverages all the resources we have available here and provides some great opportunities for the students and diversity to our population. It is a portion of students, though, that is not part of the residential group here.
Yep.
And we just want to keep an eye on that.
Kids are going to the technical school, going outward.
That's a number we're still waiting to, I mean, we do know that number, so I can't say that we're waiting for that, but I honestly couldn't tell you the actual numbers. We're always, out of the business side of things, we're always given a 6-semester average, so I don't have that number to give you, but I'm not sure.
It's not, you know, we're not in the over 100 category. It's in the, probably somewhere between, I want to say 40 and 60 is what I would say. Again, as Amity said, we don't have that data right now. I could know it, but I don't.
All right.
So I don't know, Elizabeth and board, what directions you want to give to us. As you know, we got a week turnaround, so if there's some specific things that you'd like us to focus on, I think we have some takeaways around some questions that you asked that, you know, a little bit more detail, of which some of it we gave you, but would be good that we'll include that in our presentation next time, at least some of the revenue pieces, things like that. So folks, if they have questions about that, we'll have it. But I don't know, from my, you know, next steps, if you'd like me to be considering something different. Again, we're continuing to work on it and look at, you know, things that may be changing. Again, we think right now the state data is what we're going to see. We've got CLA, as they've said, we've got equalized pupils, but not final, and those generally, some of these don't finalize, but we don't believe there's going to be a significant amount of change there. So with that said, I don't know if there's specific wants, directions that the board has for myself, Amity, and Gary.
I guess I have a question for you and the rest of the board as far as whether this would be helpful or not, and how much effort it would be. But for purposes of the community understanding what they're getting, if we were to look at a budget that had a 0 increase in the tax rate, and what kind of trade-offs would we need to do to accomplish that? And it's kind of along the lines of, it's a slight twist on the concept of a level-funded budget, but looking at the tax rate instead, which, you know, perhaps with the increase in equalized pupils, it would be a little higher than a level-funded budget. I know I'm asking the rest of the board to think, to say if this is
CLA, it would be less than level fund to get a 0 tax increase.
Because of the CLA drop.
Because of our CLA. I believe with the CLA drop, I think it
less.
would end up being less than a level funded budget to get a 0
So
tax.
we know a level funded budget requires 28 FTE
That's right.
reduction.
So we probably can use that, that's
1.8
sufficient,
million.
and there's still even a slight tax rate increase for the level funded budget. Okay, so that exercise has been done.
Well, I mean, we have some moving parts in there, because we had equalized pupils that we calculated probably at the same, you know, so it probably is
It's just,
close to the,
yeah, I
to the
think
level
it's
fund.
really helpful to explain that, all right, if we have a level funded budget, we're going to be cutting art. I mean, I'm just making that up, that's not what I would choose to cut, but just to make it clear, I mean, we've done this exercise in the past, and I'm mainly asking everybody, I'm not saying you absolutely should do this, I'm just wondering what the rest of the board thinks if we should have some
Well, I
more
think-
detail.
Yeah, I mean, my own impression would be the laundry list of things you would go to. It might be specific programs, it might be class sizes, it might be, you know, it's hard to get that level out of some of the co-curricular side of it. So, you know, there it's a sort of it's a handful of the same types of things you would go to, which largely are class size at one level and then programming at, class size at elementary and programming at the high school level.
Right.
Martin, Elizabeth, I think along Martin's lines, if we were to just get the information out there that the zero tax rate increase budget would be a net loss of so many FTEs or whatever the amount is, I think that would be sufficient. And I think it would also be helpful to have the last, say, 4 or 5 years of tax rates to compare with what we've got now, because I think it's gone both up and down in the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, that's usually part of the budget presentation.
Yeah, but having that out sooner would just help us get more reacquainted with what we're dealing with and that sort of volatility with CLA and a lot of other factors that we have no control over.
Yeah, I guess, although I don't think just for most of the public, just saying we're going to lose 28 FTEs has much meaning. I mean, if it is that we're going to have elementary school classes that are going to have 25 kids to 30 kids or whatever, and we're going to have to cut certain classes, that's potentially more meaningful. I don't, it's not a scare tactic, but it is, because people frequently say, well, you should level fund the budget, et cetera. Well, here's what that means. And here's the programming that we're providing with the budget that we're offering. I'll leave it to ponder that a little bit.
Any other direction from the board?
I guess my question is, in the past, we have sort of gone a little deeper into the line items. And these, I know that we have a change of chart of accounts and, there's some complications. I guess my question is that planned for one of these next 2 meetings where we kind of take a deeper dive? Because it feels like we're sort of staying at the 30,000 foot level so far. Usually there's at least one night where we kind of really dig in and ask detailed questions about line items and why is this one going up and why is that one going down. So that's one question, what we should expect to see the next couple of weeks, and as a board, like what we want to do in that regard. And then the second one is really, David, a little bit more from you. There is some summary in here, but really, what the community is getting. A little bit more of sort of words around, these are very good numbers, but this is why we need this additional budget that we're asking for. What's being added, what's being taken away. So, for example, we're talking about maintains the facilities following the stewardship plan with only required maintenance. Like, what are we leaving out? What are we putting in?
Summary
yeah.
Overall budget.
Yeah, so a little bit more discussion, a little bit more toward what we're going to be presenting to the community based on the budget that's sort of coalescing.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and, my normal feedback is relative to FTEs. I think, Joanne, you made a compelling case for Triple E. Again, I think the challenge is, as it always is, that our student population enrollment is relatively flat. We have seen a consistent increase in FTEs, and to me, the rubber meets the road when there is some accountability around what are the outcomes associated with the investment in these resources. And I appreciate that there's sort of a long-term view towards some of the outcomes, but I think, we have an obligation to the community to, at some point, monitor what the outcomes are and say whether we say we're going to monitor something for 10 years or for a year, and then make go, no-go decisions in some timely manner around where deployment of resources really isn't achieving the outcomes that were anticipated or expected in a positive way. So I know that's a challenge in this particular field and endeavor, but I also think to continue to add FTEs where it really does become a very long obligation. And again, I haven't seen a lot of, over my tenure on the board, programs that have been evaluated and where decisions been made by administration to really say, you know what, this did not deliver as we anticipated. We're going to stop this now, and we're going to redeploy resources into this other area. And by way of example, we're having a lot of discussion about really accessing students that we're going to see in our K through 12 program earlier. But since I've been on the board, we've also had a lot of discussions whether we can add a foreign languages program at the elementary level. And that just does not seem foreseeable at all based on the trends that we've seen around the student population that's really coming into our system and the challenges associated with that. So I think it's important that the community sort of have full knowledge of those kinds of trade-offs and what may be necessitated by the kids that are presenting themselves to public education.
Build on that, I was trying to piece together sort of this proposal and then going back to the December 19th book, which I think indicated that the plan at Marcotte was going to be about 0.92% of the budget. So quick math, about $450,000 for about, an incremental 20 kids. So 22.5 per pre-K, against an average of 16 for the school district at large. And I understand that, the argument is made that this is incredibly valuable to catch people early, but when you're starting to blend up our portfolio like that, I think it really becomes incumbent to start, demonstrating concrete metrics that we're getting a bang for the buck. And then I share Elizabeth's concern that, when we're demonstrating that we're pouring that kind of resources into that cohort, we become a magnet. And it becomes kind of a snowballing, I don't want to say problem, because, if we're effective or if parents of those kids think we're effective, that maybe is one validation. But I do worry that that's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy that's going to drive up our cost to educate. And it's really going to be incumbent that we demonstrate outcomes. And outcomes that ultimately are bending that cost curve. In other words, there is a return on that investment at the front end. Because right now, this is a very big outlay. A very big outlay, absolutely, and a very big outlay per pupil. So.
Steve, I would just challenge you on recognizing the equalized pupil that comes in on all of our students that are our pre-K programs. So 0.46, so if you take 100 against your math and calculate 170 on equalized pupil, if we were to reduce our number by 170, it would be a pretty significant.
I think there's a pretty good kick right out of the gate.
So just if you do the math, if we were to do the math on this worksheet, reduce your equalized by 170, we would see a significant loss. So just on the financial outlay, that's an important balance, I'm saying, for that. Educationally, absolutely, we know that the early intervention is there. So I think in general response to questions that we're hearing, and again, good that we're hearing this. Some of it I've heard before. Some of the things I want to say are also, hard. That what am I to do with societal issues around safety and security? It would be irresponsible not to do something around safety. So I've got 3 FTEs in here on safety and security.
Yeah, I don't think you're getting any questions on
that's
that.
pretty close to bringing me to a sum zero. But, I'm also charged with trying to make sure that kids and staff and parents can come into our facilities and feel like they're in a place where they can learn and teach. So it's that balance. I do agree that it probably shouldn't exist in the education side. I don't know. The other institutions have safety and people. and should that be out of their budget? It is in mine, and I have to be responsible to make sure that we're doing the right thing. But I don't, on one side, I don't disagree that we've had this creep. We have had a lot of societal creeps going on that have added to the complexity of the development of our budgets over time. And again, I've been at it a good long time, and I think every year we've seen, we see some added responsibilities. In many cases, developmentally, they're appropriate. I'd love to see us get to a place where we, can see less. And again, I think Joanne demonstrated on some of on the data, like with speech and language, we're seeing a positive trend. And again, I think the hope is, when you look at those two, that graph on the very right side, on the developmental delays for the same year, perhaps we're going to see next year some of those things starting to tick down, right?
I don't want to say that there are students, not those students. I just want to let you know that the students that we serve with disabilities are our students.
All of our students.
They're all
Yeah,
of
we
our
have to
students.
serve all of them. So, but the other
Well,
thing
yeah.
is, just real quickly, is a 0.92% increase, which we looked at in December. Since then, one interventionist is taken out of that 0.92%. Also, it doesn't count the fact that we're keeping that money that we'd otherwise be, per each of those individual students. There's income attached to that we're keeping inside instead of sending out to an outside provider of daycare. So,
Yeah.
so it's not really, you have to make, and I think that's what we've asked, to get that number at the next
We can give you.
meeting, to understand really what that program is gonna cost incrementally.
So I'm not sure on, not putting you back on the spot, Elizabeth, but I'm not sure exactly. We definitely have some more defined information in the presentation a little bit. I'm hearing some deeper explanations of the budget. I don't know if you're saying you want me to come in, right now, or where we are with our overall budget at 4.75, and the tax rate, as so noted, impact on the 100,000 at 43, 100 at the condo, and 146. If there's a particular direction that you'd like me to
I mean, I think
work
I
with.
think you have sort of some of the feedback. My own feedback would be, and any other board member can elaborate, is first off, I think Amity and Gary, great work from the December presentation. I think this really represents some rigor and kind of going back and looking at the must-haves. I think what you're hearing is as much a reflection of the board's responsibilities, sort of be clear with the community about what they can expect to get for the investment. I'm not really anticipating, major shaves over what we're seeing right now, but I think what you're hearing is
More of a justification of,
is really the rationale, the justification, and sort of expectation of outcomes. And I don't know if any other board member you want to elaborate on that, or?
Well, we need to be clear. This positive factor for me is I don't want differential treatment of differential and lesser treatment at Marcotte compared to Orchard and Chamberlain. So I'd be, just for that reason alone, I'd be disposed towards going for the program. But I do worry about, the attendant cost and sort of needing just a better understanding of sort of what the metrics are looking at. I see that the developmental delay is sort of inversely correlated with speech language impairment, but all the other indicators are also going up. And I don't know if those are sort of things we look for, and then speech language is sort of the one determinant.
Some of them are diagnoses that aren't going to go away. Developmental delay is something that hopefully we can mitigate. Speech language can change, but some of those are diagnoses that don't go away. So metrics we'd have to really see would be outcomes in terms of educational outcomes, which is the ends that we already report. Those things would be what we would be looking at. Maybe we just need to identify kids who have had an early intervention and see how they play out over time.
But the right 5 columns, so autism, emotional disturbance, other health, specific learning development, those are all diagnoses.
Yeah, specific
Speech
learning
language is an outcome.
Yeah, speech language is typically something that can be mitigated and changed over time. Sometimes specific learning disability, but mental health diagnoses and autism diagnoses are typically
A symptom.
yeah, they're lifetime, often lifetime diagnoses.
Okay.
Thank you.
thank you, guys.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 10, negotiations update. Bridget, do you have an update on support staff?
Just trying to remember what update I provided the last time.
Or a date for a subsequent meeting, maybe?
So we've had one meeting so far with the support staff. We have the next meeting scheduled for January 14th, and we have another meeting scheduled for January 28th. So we've sort of started our work there.
Right. And on with the educators, we have a collective bargaining session scheduled for the 7th, and I believe February 4th.
February 4th, right now.
That's correct. I'll look to know on that. All right. We'll move on to agenda item 11, executive limitations policy monitoring.
So I,
Can I suggest right away that we postpone this for one more meeting, because I really haven't had a chance to. That's particularly,
guys.
Just
well,
say the word,
particularly,
Madam Chair, and I'll-
yeah, well,
you know.
particularly relative to 2.0, I forgot to bring my whole.
no problem.
If everyone is in
whatever one it
agreement,
is.
Fine with
we
that.
will
with me.
postpone
Fine
that
with me.
for the 9th.
Yeah, just to be clear, I made just a couple changes on the introduction of that particular area, just to provide a little bit more clarity. That's all that was changed on the
Yeah.
2.0 from the first reading.
And just to refresh, I had a similar request, Martin, at the last meeting, and did have an opportunity to provide some input, so.
So I should
We'll
just say
postpone
this
it.
is fine because you provided me.
No, I'm just saying that was the background.
I'm happy to defer.
All right, we will postpone that. Setting agenda for January 9th and the 16th.
So the 9th, I don't think you have in your packet. Maybe you do? Okay, I guess I do. Okay. I'm the only one who doesn't have the 9th. That's pretty much all focused on budget.
Which one are we talking about?
I'm good.
Do we want to put
2-0.
2-0, and then we also had a, oh, that's not till the 16th.
I think we'll do the 16th, Elizabeth, we'll keep the budget
Okay.
pretty much the focus of the 9th.
The 9th, okay.
And we'll bring back the 2-0 for the 16th.
Okay. And we have a planning and visioning, you've got that down
Yeah.
already, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And just, oh, okay.
Be out of town.
So feedback on 2.0.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna be here the 9th, so. Oh, yeah, I can give my feedback on 2.0.
Maybe we could fit the 2.0
So you're gonna be here
in
for
on the
meeting
9th,
Wednesday,
if you wanted to.
And that,
But you'll be out of town for the one that's.
That's your
Okay.
call.
Yeah, why don't we try to put that on for the
So we'll
9th?
put 2.0, that will be the only additional thing we'll do on that monitoring report. We'll
Right.
put it on for 2.0.
And just to clarify, what is the, I know we have it potentially warned for action, the budget on the 16th. Is that the drop dead date on that for ballot warning?
Pretty close.
Okay.
Pretty close. Typically, we've done, we've had about the same number of meetings getting to the budget. If we might be able to go a couple more days, but we're getting close. Because the charter requires us in the city to get so we got work to. Is that? That's why I've been saying the 20th. But
20th, okay, so this would be the last scheduled meeting before, okay.
Yeah.
So any delay would be a special meeting, just
Mhm.
so the board's aware, okay.
I'll have some other, on the superintendent's report, I'll be doing a little bit of an update on the soundproofing, another update on the city school Market Street design status planning, and I'll also be just updating the board on Black Lives Matter flag raising as well.
All right, moving on to agenda item 13, future agenda items. Any additions or deletions? All right, seeing none, agenda item 14, consider the minutes of the December 17th and 19th meetings. Any changes or comments? The 17th was a planning meeting with a subcommittee, and the 19th was regular.
Mm-hmm.
All right, seeing none, those are approved. Any questions or comments on agenda item 15, AP orders? I think we just have 23 in here. Agenda item 16. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.